Okay, so today we're going to start on exercise 209. This is the one that a lot of you have been waiting for because you've been working on your chairs and you want to have cushions. So we're going to talk cushions and organic shapes and all the rest of it. I generically call it fuzzy objects, but they're not really fuzzy. It's just, blobby objects, I guess I should. But fuzzy sounds fun. Fuzzy is more to do with what material you put on it, as to whether it turns out fuzzy or not. But the truth is, modeling organic shapes or complex curves or complex surfaces is a little bit challenging. There are plugins that work for Rhino. An example would be T-splines, but it's a little bit beyond the scope of what we'll cover in the class. Grasshopper also is good for this sort of thing. But we're going to create the surfaces manually. I think if you understand the commands manually, you can build pretty much anything you want. The key to making good, realistic cloth type objects is really observing what cloth objects looks like. So if you're doing, like, say, a tablecloth, you want to go look at what a tablecloth actually looks like, and then you'll be able to model it. If you want to model a set of drapes or something in your apartment, if you look at them, you'll have an understanding of how they fold and where they bunch and that sort of thing, and it becomes more intuitive. We're going to work starting today with a cushion. This is based on a flying architecture tutorial that they went through, and I've kind of adapted it. But I'm going to kind of walk you through how I would go about making a seat cushion first. And then I'll go off and do like a throw pillow, and then maybe we'll do a tablecloth, and maybe we'll do some drapes or whatever. Kind of depends on how long you guys find me interesting today as to how long I'll go. But if you have something specific or you want me to do something different, we'll play it by ear. The truth is, I have a lot of fun with this one because it's fun to make these kinds of objects. But let's start with something basic, a standard seat cushion. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to work first in the top view. And I have a scene that's already in the large object inches template. And I'm going to work by creating a seat cushion. And so let's start with maybe a rectangle corner to corner. And I'll say my seat cushion is maybe, I don't know, 18 inches by 18 inches. Or something like that. So I started with just a standard rectangular curve. And what I really want is I want all of these to suddenly not be a contained square anymore. So I'm going to type explode, and they'll become separate little curves. So I can select each individual side. Now, if I were to look at the control points that define these curves, basically I have 2 on each of these curves. So let's look at one for example, and I'll turn on the edit points, and you see that at the end of each of this I have a point. Okay? Doesn't matter how I turned them on, I'm just trying to show you that there's a control point on each end. I want to change that so that I have some more flexibility with what this curve looks like. Obviously, it's not going to do, if I wanted a straight square cushion, I'd just do the the square, and I'd make the I'd make a cushion that looks like that, right? But I don't want it to look like that. I want it to be far more organic in its shape. So I'm just starting with the square. So what I'll do is I'll select one of these curves, and I'm going to rebuild the curve to have more control points on it. So where I used to just have a point at each end, I'm going to type rebuild, or I can go, I think it's under the edit menu, and I'll get the rebuild little dialog box. And what this does is it lets me change the number of points that define this curve. Right? When I'm done, it'll still be a straight line. It just gives me more control. So right now, I might go up to maybe, let's try 6, 5 or 6, something like that. The degree is how much curvature it has in x, y, and z. So right now it's a straight line, so the degree is 1. Since I want to have some more flexibility, I'm going to change the degree to 3. Right? And so I can click preview, and it doesn't really do much. I'll go ahead and say OK. And it still looks the same. However, if I turn the edit points on, there's a button for that right here. There's actually 2. There's control points and there's edit points. I want the edit points. If I click on it, you'll see that now I have 6 points that define the curve, where I used to just have 1. Okay? So let's go ahead and rebuild the rest of the 4 curves. Right? And so I'll select it, type rebuild. The same numbers that I put in last time are still here, so I'll go ahead and say OK. If I were to turn the edit points on, now we have more curves there. Okay? 6 is arbitrary. I could do it more, I could do it less. It depends on the level of detail that I want in this cushion. Okay? I don't have to do them all individually. I can do them at the same time. So I'll select them both, type rebuild again, and I'll say OK. And I'll turn the edit points on. And so now if I'm looking at this straight down on the shape, I have 6 points on each of the lines. Okay? I could do 10 points on each of the lines. I could do 20 points on each of the lines. It just depends how much work I want to do when I start manipulating the points. Okay, so I'm going to zoom into this one corner, and I'm going to select the 2 points that are in the corner. I'm going to drag a box around both points because I want to make sure that I'm manipulating both points, not just the 1 point from this line and the 1 point from that line. So I'll make sure I have both. And then I'm just going to drag this point in. Oops, and let me turn off ortho here. And I'm going to drag these points in until they roughly make a nice arc on the edge of this rectangle. All right, something like that. Oops, looks like I didn't get them both. Let me do it one more time. All right, and if you judge by your eye, you can get to a point where they kind of round out very nicely. Okay, we'll do the same thing. If I didn't want this to impact the side of the cushion quite as much, see how my cushion went from being straight to now it has a little bit of a dip in it, right? I could rebuild these surfaces with more points, in which case I'd get less of a dip, right? The more points you have, the straighter it ends up being long term. So let me go ahead and move this in, right? This, for those of you who like the gumball, is also a good opportunity to where you could select the points, turn on the gumball, and use that to move it. Right? Depends. For me, I'm happy with just dragging them, but it is available for you. Okay? Let me zoom in here. That was a little too much. Let's move that back out. Something like that. Okay, so if I were to look at this in its 3D view, right, I still have a perfectly flat object, but it starts to have a little bit of an organic shape to it. It's not just a rectangle anymore, which was kind of the idea. Okay? But I can come in and I could actually start to tweak this a little bit more. Right? I could move one of these points out just a little bit. Right? And actually, I'm going to concentrate on the back end here. Let me turn these points back on. And I'm going to push this out so that the back end of the cushion is actually bowing out a little bit. Right? And the side there, we could turn the points on. Just going to tweak it slightly. Let's move this out just a little bit. That. Turn this point on there. Move that out. So I'm causing the back end of the cushion to bulge just a little bit more. Front end here, I might push it so that it has even a little bit less. Let's move those guys in. Something like that. Okay? Now, the best thing to do would be to go home and look at your couch and look at the cushion that's on your couch and see what happens as it starts to deform when you sit on it, because you can learn a little bit about what the organic shape looks like. Okay, so let me hit escape twice so that I have just my curves back again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this and create an upper set of curves. So let me go ahead and copy. I'm going to type V for vertical. And we'll go up, and maybe this is going to be 4 inches thick, so I'll go to 4 inches. And so now we can start to see that, OK, I have a shape. We're looking at the perspective view here. You could imagine this as a shape. OK, it's starting to look a little bit more like a cushion would look. True? OK? So the thing about it is I want a little bit of a depression, right, along the edge here, because it's not going to be perfectly flat on every edge. Right? So once again, I have these points, but this time I'm going to start to manipulate the points in the vertical direction. So thus far, we've looked straight down and we've manipulated the points. Right? And actually, I'm looking at this. I want to round over. See, these corners didn't. I lost a little bit of detail in those corners. So let me select these really fast, turn those points back on. I'm just going to pull those corners in, round them over a little bit more. They'll look a little neater if I do that. OK. So there it is. Let me go ahead and turn the points back on. Oops, let me go into perspective here. I'll turn all the points on. So you can see how quickly there can be a lot of points that are starting to define this. And then I want to make an adjustment to the top surface, and we'll go there and there. Nothing is actually a surface yet. Right? We're going to ultimately be creating a surface, but I'm just starting to work it out. So let me go ahead and go to Move, V for vertical, and I'm going to push these down a little bit there. And so you can see in the side view, there's a little bit of a depression there. Right, let's move these down a little bit too. Move, vertical. Again, gumball, good opportunity here if you want to use the gumball. Right. Part of the reason the gumballs work nicely is because we don't need to snap to anything. Right? It's just an arbitrary nudge. And so let's go ahead and let's look at this front curve here. Let me turn the points on. You know, I want a couple more points on this, so I'm going to go ahead and rebuild this curve again. And instead of 6, I'm going to say maybe 10. And I'll turn the points on to see that I have more points now. And now I'm going to sync there and there, mimicking a little bit, let me move vertically, of somebody having sat in the seat. Right? So I've dipped it in the middle there, and I've dipped this edge a little bit. Okay? It wouldn't hurt for me to make a few adjustments to the sides at the bottom, but we're going to go with it as flat for right now. Okay? So the next piece of this is I need to be able to start to determine what's happening on the sides. So I'm going to, again, use just a regular polyline, and I'm going to make sure I snap to the corner and snap to this corner. And I'm essentially creating a line that represents the edge of the cushion. We'll do the same at each of the other corners. There and there. Okay? Now I can work with these curves as well. Okay? So let's take this curve first, and I'm going to rebuild it. And this time I'm just going to do a simple rebuild. We'll do it with 3. And then I'll turn my points on. There we are. And I want to push this out slightly. So when you start to get into this, it starts to help to work in multiple views at once. So I'm seeing it here in the perspective view, but I'm actually going to do the moving of it in the top view. So see how I bulge that out just a little bit? Right. Do the same thing here. Rebuild. 3. Let me turn those points on. I'm selecting just the 2. I have to leave these points at the same place because they have to be at the same as the rest of the curves. They have to meet up in a little point. So let me go ahead and move this. We'll move this out a little bit. There it is. All right. And we can do the same for these backs. Let me rebuild. Turn the points on. Move, and we're going to move it out a little bit like that. So I'm moving out roughly at a 45 degree, you know, at a tangent line, or I guess the perpendicular of a tangent. And we can see that I'm starting to get a pretty good outline of what this is going to look like. Okay? So if I were to make this into a surface, I'm going to walk you through that part in just a second, but just so you can kind of see what's happening. Let's say I take these and I make it into a surface. And again, I'll show you how to do that. You can kind of see, right, what I'm trying to create. Okay? Now, in reality, the cushion has a little bit more definition than what I'm actually drawing. So as I'm looking at this, right, I have a little bit of a depression from where somebody was sitting. If I were actually sitting and my butt were right here, I'd be pushing out the back edge of this a little bit more. I'd be taking the stuffing that's in here and kind of sticking it out the back. So like I said, a lot of modeling an organic shape is understanding what happens when you sit on it. Right? So let me go ahead and I'm going to do an additional line right here in the center. So mid to mid. I'm going to do a rebuild. We'll add a couple more points. Let me turn them on. And I'm going to push this out even further. So let me move. I'll move this out even further. So we're really starting to get a bulge in the back there. Okay? Likewise, if I looked right here, there should be a bulge here, and there should be a bulge here. Okay? So let me go ahead, and this is one of the very few times where I'm actually going to use the snap called near, because I want to make sure that I'm on this line but I'm going to need to snap to something that's roughly vertical, right? Something like that. And I'll do the same thing from here and from there, because I want to make sure that it's actually on the line. Then I can take these two and rebuild and turn the edit points on, and we're going to move these out. Oops. Look at it in the top view here. And we're going to have those two bulge out a bit. Now, in the center, right, it's not going to bulge out as much, so I'm going to do another line in the center here. That goes there to there. Rebuild. So you can see this is a lot of just rebuild, edit the points. Okay? But on this line, we need it to be much less. So we'll take this point and this point. We'll move. And they're going to bulge a bit, but not too much. Something like that. Okay? So I have those starting to define nicely. I could do a little bit more on the sides. I could define the bulge on the sides. But I haven't done anything on the top yet. Right? And I have to think about what's happening on the top of the cushion. And so as I said, right, I wanted to mimic as if there was somebody sitting here or had just left sitting here. So there's going to be some kind of a curve that goes along the top surface right here. So let me go ahead and create a line that goes in the center. It goes from there to there. Okay. I need to rebuild it. And I want a little finer control, so this time I might do 10. And then I'll turn my points on. Okay. So the butt depression is probably this one, and this one. I'm just holding down Shift while I'm selecting them. And let me move V for vertical. And we'll drop these down a little bit. Like that. Notice as I drop it, right, this starts to bulge up, which is good. Right? I might emphasize it a little bit more by moving vertical of that. Right? So that we get the little depression there. Okay? And I also might raise this up just a bit. Oops, I didn't type vertical. Something like that. Okay? So I have that. That's pretty good. But I have another depression that's coming across, right, in this, right, where each of these legs are. So let me go ahead and draw another line. And I'm just going to snap to near again. We'll go from there, oops, there to here. Perfect. I'm going to rebuild these two. Same thing. I'll turn those points on. And so we'll drop this and this down. And I can look at this in the side view. Sometimes it helps. Right? So we'll move. Oops. This, 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 this. Move. And more like that. And so I'm kind of looking at what it's going to look like there. These would be where the legs would be, so these probably need to go down a little bit too. Let me go ahead and move. We'll drop those down a bit too. Oops. Move vertical. Oh, I should do them all at once. Save myself a little time there. Drop them down a little bit too. Okay, so you can kind of see that I'm defining a lot based on these shapes. Let me do one more thing on this end, and that is I want to move this one a little bit higher. Oops, too high. Something like that. Okay, so now if I look at this, it's time to actually make some surfaces. Okay? And we're going to use something called a networked surface. And what a networked surface does is it takes 4 border surfaces, right, or so 4 border curves. So let's say that I had a curve that looks like this. Right? I had a curve that looks like this. I had a curve that goes between them that looks like this, and another one that looks like this. Okay? It's going to take those 4 curves, and it's going to say, oh, I want to make a surface that goes through here, and through there, and through there, and it makes a surface based on those 4 outside curves. Okay? But I can also say there's a special thing that happens right here, and I have a curve, and it will use that to help interpret the curve. It's really hard to draw and explain until I actually do it live. Okay? So let me go ahead, and this is under Curve Network. I'm going to go to Surface, Curve Network. It's called a network surface if you're actually typing it in. It's backwards. And what I'll do is it says Select Curves in Network. So it's important to make sure that we have curves going in 2 directions. So I have this curve, this curve, this curve, this curve, and this curve defining the top surface in one direction. And I have this curve and this curve defining it in the opposite direction. Once I have those, if I hit Enter, we'll get the surface from Curve Network. The tolerances and the positioning, all of this by default is fine. We'll go ahead and say OK. And it will make a surface that has the depressions that I was setting up. Does that kind of make sense? Right? So I have those. So now it's a matter of creating the rest of the surfaces. So let me go back to Surface, Network Surface, or Curve Network. We're going to pick this, and then we're going to pick in the opposite direction these curves. I'll hit Enter, and I'll say OK. And I now have that part of the cushion. And so you see, because I was thinking about what it would look like if it was kind of an older cushion when somebody kept sitting on it, right? I have the depressions of what I was intending. Okay? So on this side, I didn't actually create a special curve on the edge there. So we're just going to do a basic one. So I'll go to Surface, Curve Network. And I'll go ahead and say OK. All right, we'll do the same thing here. Okay. Okay. And then I need to do the bottom. Long curve. Hold on a second. Where's my network surface? There it is. Curve network. Say OK. Okay. Bottom doesn't have too much because it's perfectly flat because I didn't model any ups and downs to that. Okay. But if we look at the top, right, it looks pretty reasonable. So here, if we look at this edge, see how I have a little bit of an extra bump that's happening right there on that corner? Right? It would be helpful if I had a curve that was in the middle that would negate that extra little bump. But it's OK. We'll go with it. Okay? So if I were to actually do a rendering now, right, let me go ahead and set a few things up. Let me throw an infinite plane down. I'll put it on its own layer and lock it so that I can't accidentally select it. Let me go ahead and assign a material. So let me go to Materials, load a material collection. Oh, excuse me. Load a material. And I have a folder called Fabric. And we'll pick something. Yeah, whatever. Maybe this will be really ugly. I don't know. Right? And we'll go ahead and apply material to selection. Right? And then we can go ahead and render. And we can see that I have something that looks reasonably like a cushion. Okay? There's still always fine-tuning. So we have this, and we look at it. I'm just zooming in a little bit. And it's like, OK, well, I have a fabric that's going on the top. It looks reasonable. I have a fabric that's going on the sides. But the texture mapping doesn't really match. I mean, obviously, this doesn't look anywhere near what the top looks like. The texture's too big, etc. So we need to do some adjusting. So let's start, right? Because this is made from individual pieces of fabric, let's start with the top, right? and I'm going to go to my properties. I'm going to go to texture mapping, and I'm going to apply a surface mapping to this because it's just the surface. And when I go ahead and render, right, we now have the mapping applied directly to the surface. And it looks reasonable, but the scale might be a little too big still. So let me go ahead and change the UVW repeat to maybe like 2. And we'll try that render again. Now, recognize I'm completely ignoring the sides for right now. I'm trying to get the top of this to look right. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Okay. So now I want to apply a surface mapping to each of these other sides. Right? So let's go ahead and apply a surface mapping. Once again, I'm going to go to 2. I'll take this side and I'll apply a surface mapping. Although, right, because this may have been cut out of one piece of fabric, right, I might instead apply a box mapping to all of these. So let me delete this, and let's select all 4 of the sides. Right, let's apply a box mapping, which will be a bounding box, world, and I'm not going to cap it because it doesn't have a cap. Okay. And we'll repeat it at 2, and we'll have a look. All right, we're starting to get there. Okay. Now, because we've got this hard edge there, I'd like to put a little bit of like a trim little piping around it or something. So let's go ahead and do that. You guys know how to do this. It's just a sweep, right? So I have my curve still, but I need a cross-section curve. So let me go ahead and create a circle. And I'm going to do it in one of my side views here. Let's do it right here. Right? And so the diameter is maybe 1/4 inch. It's a little too big. It's like 3/16 or something like that. Okay, there it is. Right there. But it's not quite the way I want it, so let me look at it here. And I'm going to rotate this so that it's more on a 45. And I'm going to take and put it there, and let me go ahead and bury it just a little bit into the cloth. Something like that. All right, so I have that. I have a rail, so now I can go back and I can sweep. I can type. Sweep 1. There's my rail. There's my curve. There's my seam, and I'll go ahead and say OK. And so now I have that little bit of piping that's along the edge. Right? I probably need some kind of a whitish fabric for the piping. Let me go back into my materials. Load material. I don't know whether I have. I don't know what light gray looks like. Might work. Right? Let me apply to the selection. Right? And I probably need to do a texture mapping to it, but let's have a quick look. Yeah, not bad. So see how I have that little white piping that's going around. I haven't finished it on all 4 sides, but it divides up the surfaces. It starts to look like a real cushion, right? Which is the idea. If you don't like the fabric, go home and look at how fabric comes together, right? It comes together with a little seam or something. You can try to model that seam. You could pinch it in at the seam a little bit. Depends on what you're really going for. Okay, so I'm not going to keep modeling this. You guys get the idea, but I want to move on and do some other things too. Okay. So that was like a couch seat cushion type model. Okay, let's say I wanted to do like a throw cushion, right? Which would be a square, but it's kind of a pillowed. You guys know what I'm talking about? Like, you know, you have something like this, right? And it pillows up. Something like that. Okay, we're going to do that. So let's go ahead and jump back into the top view. I'll start in the top view again. And let's do. This one will be a little smaller. I'll start again with a rectangle, and I'll say at 12 inches, comma 12 inches. Right? I'm going to explode, and then I'm going to do the same basic process where I'll rebuild the sides. Rebuild. I don't need 10, I need maybe 4. I'll go ahead and say OK. I'll turn on my control points there. Right? I want these, well, I need a few more. Let me rebuild those one more time. Because I want to round over the corners, but I don't want it to affect the sides too much. Right? So let's go ahead and move this in. Move that in. That in. Okay, so I rounded over the corners. Right? The next piece is that I need to be able to build the crisscross that happens. Okay, I'm not adding too much to the. I don't need a second layer to it because it's going to come to a tapered point. So let's start with a line that goes from one corner to the other corner. And let me go ahead and rebuild this. And I'm going to start it rather simple. We'll go maybe, let's go 6 and see. All right, not bad. What I want to do is I want to look at it in its perspective view because it's going to be really hard to see this if I don't. And we'll move all 4 of the points up a bit. There. Move V for vertical, or again, you could use the gumball. Right? And we'll push this up. And I'm paying attention mostly to right here, how they come together. And then I'm going to deselect this point, and I'll move the remaining 2 points up a little bit more to start to build the bulk of the cushion. Right? And so we'll have to see how thick I really want this cushion to be. Yeah, that's probably reasonable. Right? I could move this. Let me look at it in the top view. If I wanted it to come a little bit sharper, I could move this out like that. See how it's coming in more as a sharp point versus a skinny point? So let's move that one more time. Oops. I'm going to disable my snaps. All right, something like that. Okay, so I have that. Looks reasonable. Now on the next piece, right, there's a few things that I have to be really careful of. If I cross going the opposite direction, right, and I ultimately want this to make a surface for me, I have to be very, very careful at the fact that they need to meet at one point up here. So if I were to rebuild this, and let's do it at maybe 7 this time, and I turn the points on, right? See how I have that one point in the middle? That point in the middle, I have to have it line up with this curve. So those two have to intersect. So I've moved those up. Now I'll work with the rest of these curves. Redefine. Move. Vertical. This and this. Move. Vertical. Move. So a lot of this is just setting up the curves to do what you want them to do. All right, so now I have those established. Now I'm only going to model the top half of this because I can mirror it to the bottom half, right? Which is making my life a little bit easier. Okay, so I have those established. The next thing that I need to do is I need to have curves that go in one direction and curves that go in the other direction. And so right now, if I look at this, right, I have a crisscross set of curves, and then I have individual curves going around the edge. Right? if I think of this as curves going in one direction, this curve and this curve really need to be one curve, because they would be going in one direction. So let me go ahead and take these two, and I'll type join. And then I'll take these two, and I'll type join. And now I can network surface this whole set together. So I'll hold down Shift, and I'll pick 3 curves going in that direction. Yes, they meet up at one point, but they're still all going in one direction. Right? So the difference between in our previous example, 1, 2, 3, 1, oops, 2, right? We had that. Okay. This is the same as 1, 2, 3, like that. These are essentially the same. I should add 1 in here so you can see. We just eliminated this and this, and these came to a point. But they're still in one direction and in another direction. So I'll select that. Oops. Go up to Curve Network. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll hit Enter, and I'll say OK. And it'll then build that shape for me. Okay? So this is a good example of if I wanted the pillow to be made of one fabric. Right? If, however, I wanted it to have seams, like a leather pillow or something where it would have to have seams on it, I might do it slightly differently. So I'm going to show you 2 different ways of doing it. Let me go ahead and just move this. Let me copy it, actually. And we'll come back to it. Instead, right, I can split these up. So let me take these, and we'll explode so that they're back to their individuals. Right? And then I want to split these. So let me take this one, split with this one, which is giving me 2 separates. And then we'll take this one and split it with this. Now I have 2 separates there, which basically means that instead of doing one complete surface, I can do a separate network surface on each of these. So let me go to Surface, Curve Network. Okay. Surface, Curve Network. Surface, Curve Network. If I can find it. Surface, Curve Network. Okay. So you can see that these two are very different in how they're modeled. Okay? The difference here is that this cushion is going to appear as if it has stitching that goes to a center point, where this cushion is going to appear as if it has just one piece of fabric that makes one side of the pillow. Does that kind of make sense? Okay? So let's go ahead and load some materials in. Right? Let me go to my material editor here, and let me load. I'm going to load a brown leather, right, and let me apply it to all 4 of these. Load material. Thank you. All right, and if we looked at this, I would want to texture map each of these separately, right? So I'll take this and I'll do a surface mapping. Right, I'll do this, and I'll do a surface mapping. This, the surface mapping, and this with the surface mapping. And now, when we render it, you might not be able to see this. I should switch materials. Hold on a second. I want you to be able to see the contrast here. We'll go back to my blue flower. So you can see that the textures are coming together in a point, right? And if you can't see the seam well enough, maybe I would adjust it so that you could see it a little bit better. Depending on the rotation, you might see it slightly differently. The point is that's entirely different than, say, this, if we applied the blue flower to it, and we rendered these side by side. These are coming together in a point. This is as if it's just one piece of fabric that's stretched over the pillow. Right? So I'm showing you the difference in modeling so you can think about it as you make your pillow, depending on what you want. Now, of course, we could add some lace trim to it or something like that. Right? I'll show you that if you want. But that might be a little bit more involved. The other thing that sometimes is useful is to put a little, like a little button in the center here. Let me see here. On this one. And in the first axis. Hold on one second. Sometimes they just don't do what you want them to do, right? Ellipsoid from center. There we go. First axis. Let me turn on ortho. Right, you put a little button in the center there, and when you render it, you get a little like pin of where the things. That's too small. It should be bigger, but you get the idea. So you have something like that where they come together. Different kind of pillow, right? Same concept. In reality, if I was going to do a little button, I should have brought the center down, right? Because the button tends to hold the center down. I can go back and do that, but I'm not going to make you sit here and watch me do it. But you get the idea, right? I'm trying to be reflective of the geometry of the particular scene. Okay? I'm going to pass on the fringe for right now because it would involve a custom material, but we can come back to that if it's something you're really interested in learning how to do. But for right now, I want to move on and I want to show you a slightly different command that does things like tablecloths and that sort of thing that works nicely. And then I'll also do like a wall drape. So again, I'm just trying to show you a bunch of these kinds of objects. You're going to make one today. And so anyway, let's say I wanted to do a table. The first thing that I need with the table is I need some underlying geometry that defines what the table looks like. Right? So let's say that, do you want a rectangular table or a circular table? Circular. All right. So let me go ahead and I'll start with a curve. Right? And let's say the diameter of the circular table is a 6-foot table. Okay? Let's say that, let me go ahead and I'll make a cylinder to start from. So let me go to cylinder. And I should have done it just from a cylinder to begin with. Would have saved myself time. All right? So diameter would be 6 feet. Height would be maybe 24 inches, something like that. And I end up with roughly what the table would look like. Okay? Now, in reality, we're going to tweak this a little bit because this is what I'm going to ultimately drape something over, right, to make the tablecloth. And so what this isn't exactly what the table is. It's what I'm using to make the tablecloth. Okay? So we need general parameters, but it's not all perfect. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to round over the edge of this a little bit. So let me explode this so that it's separate surfaces. And I'm going to use a fillet surface to round over the edge of the table because I want the tablecloth to have a little bit of a round edge to it. Okay? So let me go to fillet surface, and we'll set my radius, 1 inch. It's a little bit generous, but it's going to accentuate the tablecloth a little bit. So we'll go ahead and do 1 inch, and I'll go this surface to that surface, and we get that little bit of a bevel or a little bit of a round over. Okay? So the next thing is the drape. It helps a little bit if we have a side profile to how we want the table to kind of the tablecloth to flare. So I'm going to duplicate the circle here. So I'm going to say dupe edge, which some of you have seen me do before. Duplicate edge is a derivative geometry method. So when I have a surface and I want just the edge of the surface as a curve, I can duplicate that edge. I could, instead of duplicating the edge, I could just draw another circle. It's the same thing. So I'll go ahead and say OK. And that gives me a curve here. I'm going to do an offset. And we'll offset the flare maybe of 3 inches or so of the tablecloth, something like that. And the last piece, I can actually delete this because we don't need it. Right, I just need this curve. The last piece is that I want to define a surface that goes relatively straight at the top and then flares out to that 3 inch. Right? So I'm going to use this first curve. It's a control point curve. And I'm going to snap from this point. Oops, let me turn off near. All right, so I'm right on the edge. Straight down to that edge and then over to that edge. And I'll hit enter when I'm done. And you can kind of see that it created a relatively straight curve and then it kind of flares out at the bottom. Right? And I can sweep that around this tablecloth. So let me do a sweep 1. There's my rail. There's my cross section. And I end up with that kind of flaring out a little bit. Okay? Which isn't, it's not too bad. Okay? But if I stopped here and this was my tablecloth, it's still a very controlled shape. There's not the chaos of an actual tablecloth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a command called Drape to essentially put a piece of fabric over the top of this surface. Okay? And so I'm going to use the top view when I do this. So I can look down over it. There. And I'm going to go up to Surface and then Drape. And I'm going to drag a box over the top of my table, like that. And what Rhino does in the perspective view is it takes a piece of fabric, which is this mesh now, and it kind of lets it drape over the top of this surface. It's not precise. You can see that I lose some of the edge in this process, but I get some wrinkles that are happening along the sides here. So let me go ahead and move this over so you can see it a little bit better. Right? So you see that it now has some wrinkles and it's more fabric-like. Okay? It contains something that's on the ground too that I'm ultimately going to need to get rid of. Right? But I have some options. So that was just the default drape. When I go back to the top view and I do a drape again, right, we have something called auto spacing. We have spacing equals 5, and we have auto detect max depth. The only thing we're concerned about here is the spacing. What it does is it takes a sample of height every 5 inch. So if we imagined a grid of every 5 inches, because the spacing is set to 5, it says, okay, give me a point as I look straight down on the surface, right, and I'm going to sample from that. And when it goes down, right, if I move 5 inches over and it goes down, that's my new point. So if I change this to, say, maybe 1 or 2, we'll start at 1, it's going to sample at every 1 inch over the top of the table. So we'll go ahead and create another drape. And we can see that it already is a more accurate drape. Right? I still have the little wrinkles in the edge, but I don't have the big wrinkles. Does that kind of make sense? Okay? So depending on what the setting is, I can get more or less accurate as to what this really looks like. Okay? So the last thing is I really don't need the bottom, so I'm going to split off that bottom. Let me create just a standard surface in the XY plane, something like that. I'll use that. We should be able to see it in one of my side views here. There's my table. Right, I need to move it up slightly. Maybe like that. And I need to split these off. So let me take both of those, and I'm going to split them with that surface, which means I can then get rid of the surface and these lower pieces, and I end up with a tablecloth. Okay? So the other problem in this is how do you texture map it when we go ahead and apply the texture map. So I'm going to select each of these, and I'll go to my materials, and why not? We'll do the blue fabric flower, right? And I'll apply material to selection. And I know I'm going to have to change the texture mapping on this. So let's try on this one to have just a surface mapping. And the scale is going to have to be much tighter. So let's do it at 10. Right, and let's go ahead and take a render and see. So this is where texture mapping can make a big difference. Yeah?
Does it take into consideration different materials, whether it has to be draping according to what the material is?
No. I wish it did. It's just a generic drape.
So leather would appear the same as the blue.
Yeah, everything. It's actually it's meant to mimic fabric, but it's more. I have a surface that's infinitely thin, and based on my sampling, how's it going to go over the surface? That's it. Yeah. So in this example, right, the top of the tablecloth looks pretty reasonable. The sides, not so much, right? So we're going to play around with the texture mapping. I'll get rid of this texture mapping. I actually don't know off the top of my head what's the right texture mapping for this. So we tried that. I know planar isn't going to work, right? The next thing I might try is spherical mapping. So let's go ahead and do a spherical map, right? We'll do a bounding box. We'll do world. And then we'll go ahead and render and see how it looks. That's definitely too big. So let me take this, and we'll repeat it like 10. Not the best either, right? So let's go ahead and try, instead of that, let's try a cylindrical mapping. And we'll go ahead and do a bounding box, world again. We'll cap it. And then let's see. Oops, it would help if I did the mapping here. I'll go ahead and render. Probably the best so far, but it's not that good either. So none of what I've done actually looks good. So it's probably a custom unwrap that I need to do, which is a little bit more involved. So I'm not going to make you sit here and watch me do it. I'll solve the best way to do it and then show you how to do it. But I at least want to show you one more thing. If you bear with me, I want to do a curtain, because there's enough people that want to do curtains that we ought to talk about that. Okay? So it's still using the same basic method, right, that I've been doing. This time I'm going to work with a set of control curves. So let me go into the top view, and I'm going to, there's actually a second one here. This control point curve basically says if I set a point here, right, the next point here, and the last point here, right, the control point curve would draw a curve that looks like this, right? And it would give you a little dotted line and a dotted line, right? That would be a control point curve, right? A curve through points, through the same points, would say, let me draw the curve so that it hits all of the points. Okay? So this, I should have done this in a different color. This is a curve through points. Right? And this one is the, I forget what it's called, control point curve. Oops. Okay, so there are different methods for creating it. For what I'm doing right now, I actually want this second one, which is the curve interpolate points or curve through points. Right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a wavy line that represents kind of the bottom edge of this curtain. I'm going to start there. Let me turn off ortho. And I really should turn off all my snaps. And I'm going to draw the bottom edge of my curtain. Right? So it's just a wavy line. I'm going to take this and I'm going to copy it vertically. So let's look at it over here in perspective. I'm going to copy vertical, and we'll go up maybe 4 feet. Oops, helps if I can type. 4 feet. And then we'll go up maybe, I don't know, 8 feet. Something like that. Okay, so I have those. The other thing is I didn't pay attention to how long these were, so let me do a quick distance so I can see how long this is. Let me turn on my snaps. There to there. Okay, so it's 84 inches, way too long of a curtain. So let me scale 1D, and I'm working with all of these at once. We want that to be about 4 feet, something like that. Okay. The other thing that I probably should measure is I should measure distance. I'm going to say, what is it from essentially between these two? So that's a 10-inch fold. That's a pretty thick set of folds. So let's scale that down too. So let me take this, this, and this. Scale 1D. I'm going to go from here. That was my 10-inch. We'll go to maybe, a 4-inch fold, something like that. So you see how I'm kind of adjusting this geometry. Okay? So this would represent a relatively reasonable straight set of curves. Okay, a straight set of curtains. Remember, if I did a line that went down the edge here and a line that went down the edge here, right? I could then do a network surface of these. Helps if I can find it. There we go. Okay, and then I can end up with a curtain. Okay, this is a very generic curtain. If I want to make this a little bit more complex, right? Let's start adjusting things. So let's say that the top is going to be the largest point, and then I want to sway the curtain back so that the center is tied back a little bit. Right? Let's take this point here. I'm going to delete these side curves for now. And let's do a scale 1D of this. And let's pull this back to maybe 2 feet, something like that. Let's scale 1D of this. And we'll maybe this is 2'4", something like that, right? Because it's going to bunch and fall out a little bit. Then I'll go ahead and draw a line that goes from this point to this point. I'm going to rebuild it. Oops. And we'll go with 3. Let me turn those points on. Now I'm going to edit these, and I'm going to do them in the side view here. And I'm going to move this so that it sways. I'm going to have it so it comes down, right? And again, this helps if you actually look at a curtain as to how it comes, how fast it comes into that point, right? I might be a little bit too fast. Pull this back a little bit. More like that. More like that. All right, it's coming in there. Next one that I'll do is from this point to there. All right, let me rebuild it with 3. Say OK. Turn my edit points on. And really, there's not too much to this one other than we want to make it pinch in a little bit more to that point. Okay. The other thing is, because this is draping down, the tie is probably going to be pulling this end up a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to rotate from this point in this view so that this goes up just a little bit. You see how I'm kind of mimicking that tie a little bit? Then I will connect from this point to this point and from this point to that point. Right? Now, because there's a tie going through here, right, the bunching is going to be slightly different, so I want to adjust that. You can think of it in two ways. One, you could think of it as trying to take it and the folds would get bigger because the sides are, how can I explain this? It's going to get narrower here and bigger and compress more like an accordion, if I can explain that well enough. Somehow my brain has stopped wanting to explain things. So let me look at it in the top view, looking down on it here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the center set here. I'm going to move them out like this. I'll move these out a little bit more. Right, and I'll do the same thing with there. Take all four of these. Oops. Right, I have the same amount of fabric, so as it gets compressed, it needs to fold differently. If that makes sense, right? So I made that adjustment. Now, if we look at the perspective view again, right, I have curves in three different directions, or excuse me, in two different directions, but these are split into two curves. I need them to be one, so let me go ahead and join them. And let me go ahead and join these guys. And then it's a matter of selecting all of these and going up to Surface, Curve Network, okay? Right, and now we have a reasonably good approximation of the way that curtain would fall on a window. Okay? In reality, there would be a curtain rod that would be up here, so we could, oh, why not? Let's have fun. You guys are like, too much, stop talking, right? Okay, so let's say that I wanted a curtain rod to go through. So let's say I had a diameter of, I don't know, 1.5 inches. Something like that. Let's move this over to there. Like that. All right, let's take that curve. Oops. Project onto that surface. There's where the holes would go through. So let's trim. And obviously, I didn't quite plan it correctly because my curtain runs out on either end. But you guys get the idea, right? I probably need a curtain rod to go through. I told you I have fun doing this one. Let's do that. We'll do a 1-inch curtain rod. We'll throw it through. D. I don't know, something like that. And you can see that now it's going through those, right? I could add, I could put little rings around them and whatever, but enough, right? But you get the idea of how I can create a realistic looking curtain relatively easily with just a few guide curves, right? In reality, maybe I need a little rope that goes around this that holds it back. I mean, you can keep modeling and keep modeling and keep modeling, but you get the idea. What? Right. Actually, this is a total side note topic. Rhino does not have the ability to make catenary curves, which is unfortunate. Rhino 6, which they're working on, has the ability to make catenary curves, in which case we could do the actual true drapes with gravity and that sort of thing. So anyway, we're getting there. Right? So no gravity, we're defying gravity, but we're trying to approximate it. Okay? So that was the curtain part of it. Okay? Does anybody have anything else they want me to try to do? Now you got all of that, right? You can do it all, right? I'm sure. So anyway, I know it's a lot to take in, but I try to throw all of this at you so that you have different strategies. The real purpose of this is that when you start working on your chairs and you start putting cushions or whatever and you need to make something, I want to try to show you how to make it but it's so open-ended in terms of what you actually make that it's hard for me to script something. So your purpose in exercise 209 today is to make one organically shaped object. Okay? It can be a cushion. It can be for your chair. It doesn't have to be. It could be a curtain. It could be a tablecloth. It could be basically something that's cloth-like, right, or has some stuffing, or is not a rectilinear normal object. Okay? You will do the same thing that you did last class, where you end up posting it to the Rhino blocks library, right? So you'll do a little render, you'll package the materials, all of that sort of thing. Okay? Make sense? All right? All right, I'll stop talking now. Global question or individual question?
Individual.
Okay, I'll come there.
I have a question also. You keep mentioning about a chair, and I guess I didn't get that.
Okay, we'll get it for you.